When Chris Tucker rejected $10 to $12 million because of his faith in Jesus. We're going to talk all about it. If you guys didn't know, I grew up in the 90s. I'm an 80s baby that grew up in the 90s. And one of the movies that was extremely popular in the 90s, that was a rather independent flick initially and then just became a cult classic, was a movie called Friday. Friday starred Chris Tucker and Ice Cube. And it was a massive, massive movie, but it was, pretty much about just smoking weed, hanging out, losing your job. And so they did a couple of Fridays after that, but Chris Tucker wouldn't participate. And the rumor always was that, well, Chris Tucker, he turned religious on everybody. He's kind of high and mighty, yada, yada. But he never really publicly spoke about it overtly until recently, where they went in to attempt doing the final version of Friday, and they offered him this ridiculous amount. And so here is a tweet from Ice Cube himself that says, we were ready to pay Chris. That's a lot of money. Hold on. We were ready to pay Chris $10 to $12 million to do next Friday, but he turned it down for religious reasons. He didn't want to cuss or smoke weed on camera anymore. I would say that's a W for Chris Tucker turning down that kind of money. And as I dug more into this story, this is an article from a website called God Updates. There was a couple quotes in here from him. He says, being a Christian, helps me in my comedy. I have to talk about other stuff. He emphasized, normally most comics talk about stuff that's easy, maybe cussing or saying something raunchy. I have to dig deeper to find something that's still funny and not raunchy. It's harder. I like the challenge. So here you have, at the time, Friday exploding, becoming a cult classic, one of the biggest movies. Chris Tucker saying, nope, I'm not going to participate. I am not going to engage. I'm not going to continue smoking weed on camera. I don't want to be pigeonholed as that type of person, but not just because he didn't want to be pigeonholed, because he didn't want that to negatively reflect his new faith in Jesus. And 20 years later, 25 years later, he's still standing on those principles. I think that says a whole lot about his integrity with regards to this entire issue. And I think it's very commendable that Chris Tucker is taking this sort of position in Hollywood, which is all about making men do some wild stuff. And since the first Friday came out, Chris Tucker went on to do the Rush Hour series, as many of you guys know, with Jackie Chan. And those movies were massive and had a ton of impact internationally. He arguably became an even bigger movie star. But all along, he stayed true to his guns and he didn't compromise his faith. And I think it's very commendable, but I think there's a practical application for many of us. What are you willing to sacrifice in order to honor God with your time, your talent, and your treasure? What are you willing to give up so that you could be in right standing? Some of you guys know this about me. I actually come from doing music, and I independently went full-time in 2015, meaning no record label, no major deal, no corporation behind me, nothing like that. It was making Christian hip hop back in 2015. And it was really awesome to see God provide in that sort of way. And that kind of got me on the pathway to do the YouTube stuff that I'm doing now. But there was a point in time where I too was at a crossroads, and it wasn't to the extreme of, playing a weed head who's cussing a whole bunch in a movie, but I came to a crossroads as well in terms of what am I going to allow to drive the narrative of my career and my future, and what am I going to allow the thing to define who I am in terms of my output? And I had to make a hard decision, pull away from some relationships and cut back on some areas that I was doing a bit too much on, some of the people I was working in, the type of work I was doing in terms of the amount of traveling, and sacrifice something that at the time felt like the most important thing in the world. But in the long term, it ended up working in my favor. And so I think when we consider God's ways, we often forget that God's ways are actually in our best interest. We often forget that when we let go of the thing that we think is the most important aspect of our lives, when we let go of that, oftentimes an idol, whether that's a career, whether that's a relationship, whether that's whatever it can be, the times we can let go of that and have an open-handed mentality, God tends to go beyond what we may have even expected. Not in a materialistic sense all the time, because sometimes you can still catch an L financially. Believe me, when I had to make some adjustments in my career, there was an L financially. And then when I had to pull back even more, there was even more of an L financially. It was the pandemic, things were locked down, but by the grace of God, I was able to pivot and transition into doing the thing that I believe that God called me to do. And so my question would be for you guys, what are some things that you may be feeling like God is telling you to sacrifice? What are some things you feeling like maybe, just maybe, it's not the right time to continue pursuing that relationship or that career path or that education or whatever? What are some things you feel like you may have to lay down, take a short-term L for the longer come up? And again, I'm not just talking about it in a materialistic sense. Some of you guys have some relationships you need to cut off. Some of you guys got some friendships you need to cut off. Some of you guys have some boyfriends or girlfriends you may need to cut off. Some of you guys have some folks that are just weighing you down and you need to set some better boundaries to pull back from. And I feel like the faster we get to that place of doing that, the better we will be in the long term. But it's difficult in the short term. I'm sure for Chris Tucker to turn down $10 to $12 million to do one movie was probably a very hard decision. But I'm sure being on the other side of that and being able to sleep at night and being able to look in the mirror and feel good about who he's become, he probably made the right decision, not just on the macro scale, but internally making that decision was the right decision. Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew said, "What is it worth to gain the world and lose your soul?" What is it worth to gain the world and lose your soul? See, we are so consumed with results in the West as Americans. We just want the end product, the microwavable, hey, we did this and this happened, now I'm famous, now I'm rich, now I'm this, now I'm that. But the difference with God is that the process of how you get to the thing matters. The process of what gets you there matters. That it's not just about the ends justify the means, whatever you have to do to get your come up, make sure that you're winning because you got your thing YOLO, right? No. The how to God matters. Are you considering the how in terms of your pursuits? Are you considering the how? There's a quote that I heard a long time ago, and it said that God's will, God's perfect will for our lives is found in God's ways for our lives. So if you want to be in the middle of God's perfect will for your life, you have to start pressing into God's ways of doing things. You have to start pressing into God's ways of doing relationships, God's ways of doing finances, God's ways of doing career, God's ways. If you press into God's ways, you won't always have to be consumed with these fork in the road questions because God's ways will lead you to God's will, and God's ways are in God's word. If you're confused about what God's ways are with relationships, you can find that out easily in the scriptures. If you're confused with how does God want you to handle your finances, you can find that out in the scriptures. Stick to doing things God's ways, and you will be in God's will, and you find God's ways by digging in God's word. So guys, if you enjoyed this video, make sure you smash that like button one time for the algorithm. If you guys want to go the extra mile and partner with us here for as little as $5 a month in our online community to continue helping us contextualize the gospel through videos like this, consider partnering with us in our online community so that we can stay independent, keep you as our boss, and never have to take a brand deal and make commercials like these.
Our friends at Genucel Skincare have exciting news to celebrate in 2023.
Using Manscaped during my showers after workout has given me much more confidence.
And that's where Mud Water comes in.
True Classic has got your back.
All thanks to the sponsor of today's video, SayMine.com.
Established Titles is your opportunity to earn the title of Laird, or lady. Subject credit approval rates range from 7.99% APR to 19.99% APR, included 0.50% auto pay discount.
If you don't want us to make ads with brands you don't care about, sign up for our online community for as little as $5 a month to keep us independent and ultimately answering to you as our boss. You get all sorts of benefits like daily replays of our after party streams, exclusive access to our Discord community, and early access to our podcast interviews, all starting for only $5 a month.
King streaming.